The far north had no walls. It had teeth of ice and bones of stone, winds that peeled skin from faces and songs of wolves that never quite died. It had silence, deeper than any crypt, and sky that seemed to stretch forever. It had him. The figure the stories called the Night King stood at the edge of a great blue cliff, the glacier's sheer face dropping away beneath his feet into darkness. The ice here was old. Older than the wall, older than the first keepstones men had set in place, older perhaps than the memory of trees. It glowed faintly from within, the color of frozen fire. He raised both hands and laid his fingers flat to the ice. Frost crawled out from his touch in elegant, branching patterns, spreading like white veins through the blue. The glacier groaned. Deep within it, something shifted. Around him, the others watched. They were tall and still, armor of ice catching the faint shimmer of distant aurora. Their eyes burned with the same unnatural blue flame, but none shone as bright as his. The ice moved, slowly, as if something long asleep were stretching after a 1,000-year slumber. A shape began to distinguish itself beneath the surface. A ridge here, a curve there, indistinct at first, then sharper. A horn, another, a jawline like a blade, teeth forming as solid frost, each a yard long. A neck coiling, spines along its length. Wings, vast, membranous things, thin as glass and strong as stone, pressed flat within the glacier's heart. He did not shape it as men might shape clay. He woke it. The magic that moved through him was not fire and words and begging gods for favor. It was cold drawn in so deep it burned, old bargains hardened into ice. He remembered, it did not matter how. From a time when dragons had scorched the world and men had begged the trees and stones for something to stand against them. This was not the first of its kind. The last had died when the fires of Valyria cracked the earth and boiled the sea. The world had changed shape that day. But ice remembered. He pressed his hands harder. The glacier split. Cracks shot outward from beneath his palms with a sound like mountains breaking. Chunks of ice the size of houses sheared off and plummeted into the abyss, shattering on unseen ledges before falling farther still. A head emerged. It tore free of the ice with slow, inexorable strength, sending shards blinking in the starlight. Its eyes opened, pale as frozen glass, blue ghosting beneath the surface. Its breath gusted once, a plume of air so cold it made even the other's armor crackle with frost. It screamed. The sound was deeper than Skyrender's roar, older. It rolled across the empty land, echoing from peak to peak, scattering ravens from their perches miles away. Snow imploded where the sound passed, compressed under the weight of it. The ice dragon dragged itself from the glacier's womb. Its body was a cathedral of frost and frozen sinew, ribs like ribs of ships lost in old seas, skin a translucent film of ice stretched over ancient shape. Its wings opened, each span casting a shadow like a storm cloud. Inside, veins of darker blue pulsed, slow and cold. The Night King stepped back as it braced itself on the cliff, claws biting into ancient ice. Shards fell around him, tinkling like broken glass. He lifted one hand. The dragon's massive head turned toward him, blue light brightening in its eyes. It exhaled again, no steam, only a breath that turned the air itself brittle. No name was spoken. None was needed. The dragon knew him, knew his will. It had slept with it wrapped around its bones for longer than men remembered their own small kings. Far, far to the south, for other dragons wheeled above sea and stone, their fires and bonds new by comparison. Their cries had threaded the wind, reached even here, thin but insistent. The Night King had felt them and had been still. Now he answered. His new dragon spread its wings, a crackle of frost shedding in sheets. It leapt from the cliff, the glacier trembling with the force of its takeoff. The Night King watched it go, the hint of something like satisfaction ghosting across his ancient, ruined face. Let fire come, he thought, not in words but in the deep, cold intent that bound him to ice and night. Let it see what waits. Bran Stark saw it coming through roots and stars. One moment he sat in his chair, Furs piled around his wasted legs, hot or long gone. The gods would full of the soft whisper of snow on branches. The next, the bark under his fingers grew slick with cold, and his mind dove. He flew north, past Winterfell's walls, past the frozen fields where men hacked at the ground to dig ever more shallow graves, past the last river, past the gift, past the wall itself. The world blurred, landmarks smearing into streaks of white and gray as he slipped along unseen threads. The air grew colder. He reached the far north and kept going. No fires burned here. No voices rose in song or fear. Only silence, broken now and then by the groan of ice shifting or the distant rumble of avalanches. Then he heard it, a roar that was not a roar, deeper than anything he had ever heard. It wasn't sound so much as pressure, a vibration in the bones of the world. He slowed, mind-straining. There, a wound in the land, a vast blue cliff cracked open, ice calved into ruins at its base. And above it, circling slowly, wings cutting the starlit sky, was a shape that made the dragons over Dragonstone look suddenly smaller in his memory. It was dragon-shaped, yes. Long neck, horned head, wings that stretched like sails. But it glowed faintly from within, veins of blue light pulsing under its translucent hide. When it turned, he saw the ridges along its back were jagged frost, each spine a serrated blade. It drew breath. Bran saw the air around its mouth twist, turning clear to silver, silver to something so pale it was almost invisible. When it exhaled, the breath did not burn. It erased. Snow below vanished, leaving bare, glassy rock. A distant ridge took the touch of that breath like a caress and crumbled, whole chunks turning to powder and drifting away on the wind. He tried to pull back. He felt something pull with him. A presence turned its gaze up toward where he hovered, half here, half in Winterfell's godswood. It was the same he had felt before. A cold that went beyond any weather, beyond mere absence of heat. A will that moved armies of dead as easily as Jon moved his hand. The Night King, blue eyes, bright as stars over a frozen sea, looked at him. Bran gasped. Cold flooded his chest, pressed into his skin where the raven-shaped scar on his arm burned. Frost crawled along the edges of his vision, shards forming. He wrenched himself away. The godswood slammed back around him, sound and color returning in a rush. He choked on his own breath, fingers digging into the weirwood's bark hard enough to scrape skin. "Bran?" a voice said, far away and close at once. "Bran, what is it?" He blinked. The white washed from his eyes. Sansa knelt before him, hands on his shoulders, blue eyes wide with worry. Snow clung to her lashes. Behind her, the red leaves whispered, unsettled. "There's another dragon," Bran said. His voice sounded wrong to his own ears, too thin, too small. "In the north, not like Jon's, not like hers." Sansa's fingers tightened. "Hers? Daenerys," Bran said. "It's made of ice." The Night King woke it. Sansa's face went very still. "How many?" she asked quietly. "How many dragons does he have?" "One," Bran said. "But it's big, older, cold." He swallowed. "And it saw me." Winterfell's great hall had seen fear before. It had watched the long winters come and go, seen kings fall and usurpers rise. It had held the weight of wails and laughter both. Yet the silence that fell now when Sansa Stark spoke seemed to sink deeper than even stone. "A dragon of ice," Lord Glover repeated. "From children's tales." "From Bran's visions," Sansa corrected. He saw it with the weirwood's eyes. The last time he saw the Night King, that mark on his arm burned, and the dead found their way to the cave where his teacher hid. "I am begging you not to call this tales." Lyanna Mormont folded her arms. "I don't care if it's made of shit and dream wine. If it flies with the dead, we need to kill it." "How?" another lord asked. "If Dragonfire fails?" "Skyrender," Sansa said. The name still felt strange on her tongue, a word from a world that should have stayed in stories. But the ravens had brought tales from the Wall and Eastwatch, from wildlings who spoke in odd tones of a black and white dragon whose flame unmade the dead, from Night's Watch brothers whose ink shook as they wrote of fire that burned white and shadow, of whites turned to dust. Jon's dragon can break their magic, she went on. We've seen that. If this ice dragon is bound to the same power, then Skyrender may be our only answer. And Daenerys's beasts? Someone asked. 3 of them, they say now. Hers used to burn cities. Ours burns corpses. Maybe if they both. We don't know, Sansa cut in. And we don't have the time to learn slowly. She turned to Maester Wolkan, who clutched his quill like a drowning man might clutch a rope. Right? She said. He bent over the parchment. To Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen at Dragonstone, she dictated. The Night King has woken something new in the north, a dragon of ice. My brother Bran has seen it in his visions and felt its maker's gaze. If you mean to stand against him, you must know this. Your fire is not unchallenged now. You must come north at once, with all your strength and all your dragons. And you must bring Skyrender. She paused, then added, the wall may not be the only line that needs holding. Wolkan's quill scratched. As the ravens took flight that night, black specks vanishing into the snow, one of them carried the weight of old grudges and new fears southward. They always have more, Tyrion said quietly. He moved the rough 4th figurine, carved hastily from a chunk of obsidian by a nervous craftsman, closer to the carved wall. It had no detail, only the suggestion of wings and a gaping mouth. Somehow that made it more frightening. We thought the dead were old women's tales until Jon dragged one into a throne room, he went on. We thought the Night King had only whites and whatever those tall blue-eyed bastards are. Now he has this. In the books, Missandei said softly, there are stories of ice dragons, great beasts that haunt the shivering sea, made of living frost. Sailors say they breathe cold so deep it freezes your bones from the inside. Good, Davos muttered, because I was worried this might be easy. Daenerys's hands rested on the edge of the map. Her knuckles were pale where she gripped the carved wood. It changes nothing, she said. We were going north with the dragons. Now there is more reason to do so. That is all. It changes tactics, Jon said. He'd read the letter 3 times. He could still see Bran's cramped handwriting in his mind's eye, the way the ink seemed to wobble in places as if the hand that guided it had shaken. He could feel his brother's dread threaded through the careful words. If this ice dragon's breath can break stone, Jon went on, if it can freeze flame, then flying at it as we are now is foolish. Skyrender's presence pressed at the back of his thoughts, restless. Drogon's shadow passed over the window again, as if in echo. Your dragons are flesh and blood, Tyrion said. Whatever magic woke this ice creature, it's still bound to something. A spell, a will. The Night King's, Jon said. And Skyrender's fire unravels his magic, Tyrion finished. We've seen that. Whites falling to dust. White Walker shattered. Perhaps Skyrender can unmake the ice dragon, Daenerys said. Jon met her eyes. Perhaps. And if he cannot? Davos asked quietly. If Dragonfire meets whatever breath that thing has, and both die in the middle? Then we find out, Jon said. Before the wall does. Daenerys straightened. I came here to reclaim a throne, she said. But the more I see, the more I understand that throne will mean nothing if the dead sweep south. If this Night King reaches the neck, all our banners burn alike. She touched the carved north. We go, she said. All 4 dragons. You and Skyrender. Me and Drogon. Rhaegal and Viserion with our best riders. Jon nodded once. To Eastwatch, he said. There's a small castle there on the sea. The wall meets the water. If we can lure him there, away from full strength. An ambush then, Tyrion said. A dance of 4 dragons and 1 ghost against an ice monster and an army of corpses. I've heard worse songs, Davos muttered. The day they left Dragonstone, the sea tried to drag them down. Waves smashed themselves to foam against the black cliffs. flinging spray so high it touched the lowest parapets. Wind clawed at banners, set the trees on the island's sparse heights bending. Rain flew sideways, lashing faces and armor. Daenerys felt all of it and reveled in the fight. Drogon threw himself off the cliff with a scream, wings snapping open to catch the gale. She leaned into his neck, hands firm on the ridges, body moving with his. Water sheeted off his scales, turning to fine mist in his wake. Skyrender followed, less showy but no less sure. Where Drogon bullied the air, Skyrender cut through it, wings angled to slip between gusts. Jon hunched low over his spine, legs strapped with extra leather for security, Ghost's distant awareness threaded with his own. Rhaegal and Viserion rose behind, each bearing a rider whose knuckles were white around makeshift harness grips. Men of the North and the Reach who had volunteered for this insanity and been judged mad enough to accept. Dragonstone dwindled behind them. Ahead lay only Grey Cloud and the long miles to Eastwatch. They flew north. Eastwatch by the sea looked fragile. The wall plunged into the frozen ocean in a sheet of blue-white, its end vanishing under ice that had swallowed waves whole. At its foot crouched wooden towers and stone storehouses, huddled together against the wind like men sharing body heat. As the dragons broke through the low cloud, horns sounded on the ramparts. Jon saw tiny figures running along the top of the wall, black cloaks snapping. Fires flared to life, torches lit in a line like a spine of flame. On the narrow strip of shore between wall and sea ice, men and wildlings clustered, craning their necks. He glimpsed faces he knew. Tormund, beard full of frost, squinting into the wind. A handful of black brothers from the Shadow Tower. Free folk who'd chosen to fight on the side of the living rather than fade into stories. Skyrender rumbled low in his chest. "We are seen," that sound said. "Ours." Drogon screamed in answer, banking once over the wall, a deliberate show of power. Rhaegal and Viserion followed, their smaller forms weaving excited loops. Jon guided Skyrender lower. They landed on the outer ledge, claws biting into ice, wings half spread to keep balance. The wall groaned under their combined weight but held. Jon swung down, boots crunching on snow-packed stone. "You always did like an entrance, Crow," Tormund called, trudging toward him, arms outspread as if to embrace the sight and Jon himself in one go. "Now you've brought 3 more monsters to go with your first." "Fewer monsters than you?" Jon said, managing a tight smile as they embraced. Fur against leather, warmth against cold. Tormund's eyes slid past him to Daenerys, dismounting from Drogon in a swirl of black and silver, hair whipped by the wind. "And this must be your Fire Queen," he said. "I've heard of women who ride dragons, but I thought that was just something men say to make their cocks feel small." Daenerys's brows rose. Jon sighed. "Tormund Giant's Bane," he said. "He means well." "Does he?" she said coolly. Tormund grinned, entirely unrepentant. "If you keep the dead off my people, I'll mean better." His face sobered as he gestured north. "They're close," he said. "The air smells wrong, like a storm that never moves, like breath that doesn't belong to anything living." "How many?" Jon asked. Tormund shrugged, a sharp jerk of his shoulders. "Enough to make the sea ice groan with their steps. Enough that if we fail, there'll be no one to tell stories about it after." They saw the army before they felt its cold. From the top of the wall, the world beyond looked like an endless sheet of white, textured only by the occasional ridge or cluster of half-buried trees. At first, the movement was easy to mistake for shadows or tricks of wind. Then the shadows resolved into shapes. Whites marched in ranks that were not truly ranks, more a mass, a tide. They stumbled and lurched and crawled, but all moved in the same direction, toward the wall. In their midst, larger figures strode, tall and pale and terrible. Over them all hung a storm. It was not the natural kind. The wind at the top of the wall blew east that day, dragging clouds across the sky. But over the army of the dead, a low ceiling of whirling snow and ice remained fixed, unmoved. Lightning flickered inside it now and then, a cold, blue-white flash without thunder. Drogon snarled from his perch, wings twitching. Rhaegal and Viserion shifted uneasily. Skyrender's scales rippled, white veins glowing faintly. "They're pulling the storm with them," Jon said. "No," Daenerys replied, eyes narrowed. "They're pulling something else. The storm is hiding it." As if in answer, a low sound rolled across the plain. A distant, bone-deep note that made the hair on every neck at Eastwatch stand up. It was like thunder, if thunder could whisper your name in a tongue you didn't know. Jon's hand went to Skyrender's neck. The dragon's muscles tightened under his palm. "He's here," Jon said, "and what he woke with him." "Good," Daenerys said. "Then we know where to aim." They did not come straight at the wall. As the living watched, the army of the dead angled to the left, curving away toward a wide bay where the sea ice pushed inland between jagged rocks. The shoreline there was treacherous even in summer. Hidden inlets, sudden drops, but winter had laid a smooth, deceptive skin over it all. The dead marched onto that ice without hesitation. Hundreds of whites spread out in a dark smear across the frozen bay. At the rear, on slightly higher ground, the White Walkers arrayed themselves like carved figures. Their armor caught what little light there was, flashing briefly. Spears of ice glimmered in their hands. At their center, the Night King stood. He was taller than the rest, his armor more intricate, his crown of frozen horns more jagged. The wind tossed his white hair around his ruined, blue-lit face. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He lifted one hand. The storm above them thickened. Snow that had been swirling lazily began to spin harder, faster, tightening into a whirl. From the wall, it looked like a great, dirty white halo, its edges blurring as it grew more frantic. Lightning flickered within, flashes illuminating something huge that moved inside the cloud. "Now," Jon said. He swung himself into Skyrender's saddle, leather creaking. Ghost barked once, frustrated to be left behind, then loped to the stair to follow the ground party's part of the plan. Below, wildlings and brothers scrambled into position. Archers at the ready, barrels of oil set, pitch torches in hand. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back, movements fluid and sure. Rhaegal and Viserion's riders scrambled up their makeshift harnesses, faces pale but determined. "Burn the whites first," Jon called across to her. "Thin their numbers, then go for him." She nodded once. "For the living," she said. "For the living," Jon echoed. They dove like falling stars. Drogon led, a streak of black and red cutting through the gray. Skyrender followed just above and to the side, slightly higher, his white-veined scales gleaming. Rhaegal and Viserion flanked them, smaller but swift, eager. The wind screamed past them. Jon's eyes watered. He squinted into the gale, the army below swelling in his vision. At a wordless command from Daenerys, Drogon opened his jaws. Fire poured from him. It bloomed over the front ranks of whites, a torrent of red-gold heat. Bodies exploded under its touch, bone and cloth and frozen flesh turning instantly to char. Those behind stumbled, then burned in turn. A swath of the bay's surface went from white to black in a heartbeat. Rhaegal and Viserion peeled off, spraying flame along the edges, hem of the army. Whites fell in droves, their blue eyes winking out. Skyrender held his breath. "Now," Jon whispered when they reached the heart of the mass. Skyrender exhaled. His fire met Drogon's in a seam down the center of the army. It was a different light. White so bright it hurt to look at, edged with flickers of darkness that seemed to drink their own glow. Where Drogon's flame licked and devoured, Skyrender's seared and erased. Whites hit by it did not fall burning. They shattered into dust, their forms turning to crumbling statues before wind scattered them. The line of white cut straight toward the Night King. He stood motionless, watching. The blast nearly reached him before he raised his hand again. The frozen bay cracked. The sound was as loud as a thunderclap, a deep boom that Jon felt in his chest. Jagged lines shot outward from the Night King's feet like spreading spiderwebs, blue glimmer rushing along them. Ice rose. It surged up from the bay in a great ring, a wall within the bay, a circle of translucent blue taller than any ship's mast. It encircled the Night King and his nearest White Walkers in a heartbeat. A smooth, glassy bulwark. Skyrender's flame hid it. For a moment, the world was nothing but light and steam. The white fire slammed into the blue ice, and both screamed. Steam exploded outward in a wave that knocked White's flat and made Drogon veer, wings buffeted. Jon's ears rang. He clung to Skyrender's neck as the dragon grunted. Forced to pull up, his breath stream interrupted. When the steam cleared, the circle still stood. Cracks spiderwebbed through it where Skyrender's flame had struck deepest, lines of whiteness in the blue. Chunks had fallen away, hissing where they hit the bay. But the Night King remained behind it, untouched. His head tilted slightly. He had seen Skyrender's breath now. He had felt its bite on his magic. He was not smiling. His face did not seem built for such things, but something in the set of his shoulders spoke of grim satisfaction. He raised his arms. The storm ripped itself open. From within the whirling mass of snow and ice, the ice dragon burst forth. It was larger than any of them had guessed. Larger even than Skyrender, perhaps, though the difference was not in length or wingspan so much as in the impression of sheer, terrible mass. Its body shone with inner light, blue veins pulsing like a heartbeat under its translucent hide. Jagged spines of frost ran along its back, each one a spear. Its wings unfurled with a sound like mountains grinding together. The air around it grew colder. The four dragons' steaming breath turned to thin mist. Jon's teeth ached in his skull. The moisture in his eyes threatened to freeze. The ice dragon screamed. It was not fire that gathered in its throat, but something worse to those who flew opposite. The air in front of its maw twisted, visible as a shimmering distortion, then condensed into a pale, glassy bolt. It exhaled. The breath that poured out was not flame, but a torrent of pure, killing cold. It glowed faintly, a blue-white beam that froze the very air it passed through. Drogon rolled. The blast clipped the edge of his wing instead of striking straight on. It hit the sulfurous smoke of his own last breath and exploded in a cloud of razor-edged ice crystals. The impact sent him tumbling, roaring in pain and fury. Daenerys clung tight, teeth jarred. Regal and Viserion scattered, instincts screaming. Rime formed along the tips of their wings where the breath had brushed too close, edges turning glassy. Only Skyrender held his line. Now, Jon hissed through chattering teeth. They met over the bay, mid-air, two ancient hungers hurtling toward each other. Skyrender's chest swelled as he drew in breath. The white veins along his sides glowed brighter, lines of light pulsing under the black. His throat lit from within, a radiance that showed through the thin membranes between his scales. The ice dragon's maw opened wider. The blue glow within its chest spread up its neck, a tide of cold. Frost spread ahead of it, a ghost of its breath yet to come. They exhaled at the same moment. Fire and cold met in a line between them. Skyrender's white and black flame slammed into the ice dragon's blue-white torrent. For a moment, the result was blinding. A sphere of light where the two forces collided, suspended in the air between them. Then the world exploded. Steam erupted in a vast, billowing cloud, so hot and cold at once that it shredded itself, twisting into shapes and vanishing. Shards of something, neither ice nor stone, but a strange, brittle substance that seemed like frozen fire, rained down, hissing as they plunged into the bay and the ranks of whites below. The shockwave hit both dragons. Skyrender's body jerked, wings thrown back. Jon was nearly unseated, only reflex and the leather straps saving him from falling into the chaos below. His ears rang. His vision snapped white, then dark, then slowly filled with smeared shapes. He felt Skyrender's pain. Not mortal, not crippling. A deep, bruising ache along the dragon's chest and wings where the opposing force had hit. But he also felt something else, resistance. The fire in Skyrender pushing back against the encroaching cold, refusing to be quenched. The ice dragon reeled too, Frost cracked along its neck where the mixed fire had touched. Lines of spiderweb fractures laced its translucent hide, blue light leaking through in odd patterns. It roared, a sound more furious now, more surprised. The Night King's head tilted again fractionally. His eyes narrowed. Below, the bay became a killing ground. Where the shards of frozen fire struck whites, they did what Skyrender's flame had done before, unmade them. Bodies collapsed into dust, armor and rotted clothes falling as empty shells. Those too close to the collision of breaths were simply gone, erased from existence as if they had never been. White Walkers lifted ice shields, their magic reacting quicker than flesh. The shards rang off the translucent barriers, leaving spiderweb cracks but failing to penetrate. The circle of ice around the Night King trembled, a few more fist-sized chunks falling away, but still held. On the wall, men gaped. What in all seven hells was that? Someone breathed. The gods, another whispered. No, Davos said under his breath, eyes fixed on the sky. That's something older. Tormund spat over the edge. Whatever it is, it kills dead things, he said. I'm for it. They watched as the two dragons wheeled, recovering. Drogon fought his way back up, wings laboring harder than usual. Frost rimmed the torn edge of his left wing, a fragile-looking filigree that made his movements stiff until the heat of his heart melted it away. Daenerys felt the pain through their bond, a sharp, stinging chill, the memory of chains. She hissed sympathy between her teeth. Easy, she murmured, stroking his neck. You're not beaten yet. Rhaegal and Viserion flanked him, smaller bodies darting, their riders pale-faced but hanging on with desperate tenacity. Their eyes shone wild, the inimical cold below making their fires burn all the brighter. Skyrender took his place between them and the ice dragon. Jon's chest heaved, breath tearing in and out. His face was reddened by wind and frostbite, eyes narrowed against lingering steam. He shouted across the gap. His breath can break stone, he called. But it's not. It's not invincible. You saw what happened when they met. Daenerys nodded, understanding. He's not a god, she shouted back. He's a weapon, and weapons can break. The ice dragon hovered at a distance now, wary. His cracked neck pulsed with blue light. Where Skyrender's flame had touched deepest, a chunk of its hide had turned opaque, less translucent than the rest, frost blooming outward from that point like infection. The Night King lifted his hands again. He was not retreating, not yet. The dead surged forward once more. He drove his army forward like a man might press an advantage in a siege. The whites, heedless of the destruction that had torn holes in their ranks, stepped over the dust of their fellows and kept coming. Giant corpses lumbered among them now, vast, hulking shapes whose footsteps cracked the ice deeper. Dead bears padded forward, fur stiff with frost, mouths full of blackened teeth. The White Walkers moved with more caution, spreading out along the rear, spears of ice held loosely but ready. They watched the sky as much as the wall. The Night King stepped closer to the edge of his ice circle. He lifted a hand and made a subtle gesture. The ice dragon responded. It banked smoothly, angling away from the cluster of living dragons. Instead of charging them again, it turned its attention to the wall itself. What's he doing? Jon breathed. Daenerys saw it the same moment he did. Stop him, she said. The ice dragon drew in a deep breath as it flew toward the wall's northern face, jaws opening wide. The wall screamed. The ice dragon's breath hit it in a broad swath, a beam of blue-white cold that sank into the ancient ice and stone with terrifying ease. For a heartbeat, the wall flashed brighter along that line, as if lit from within. Then the cracks appeared. They raced outward from the point of impact, threads of white and dark splitting the blue. Whole sections of ice bulged, then shattered outward in chunks that fell hundreds of feet, pulverizing the frozen sea below. Men on the ramparts fell to their knees. Some slid, boots losing purchase as the wall shuddered. Alarm bells clamored, their clangs lost in the roar. Skyrender, Jon shouted, voice raw. Now! He didn't have to explain. The dragon felt what he felt. The visceral wrongness of the wall breaking, the line that had stood for 8,000 years beginning to crumble. Skyrender dove. He did not go for the ice dragon this time. He aimed lower, white and black fire building in his throat, every muscle straining as he folded his wings for speed. He exhaled at the wall. The mixed flame slammed into the injured ice. For a moment, it seemed as if he was only adding chaos to chaos, heat and cold colliding in a riot of steam and screaming stone. But then something unexpected happened. Where Skyrender's fire licked along the cracks, the blue of the wall's ice changed. It flashed white, then settled into a deeper, more solid hue. Fractures that had been spreading began to slow, then stop, edges fusing together. The sections that had bulged retreated slightly, refreezing into smoother planes. Steam billowed, obscuring everything. Men coughed, eyes watering. Jon's skin burned and froze at once. But when the cloud cleared enough to see, the wall was still standing. Damaged, yes. A huge, rough, scorched gash marred its northern face. Chunks of ice and stone lay in ruin below. But the crack that had threatened to race across its entire width, to bring down an entire segment in ruin, had been stopped mid-spread, sealed by fire that understood ice. Skyrender's chest heaved. Jon felt the dragon's exhaustion. Deep, bone deep, but also a grim satisfaction. "You held it," Jon whispered. "You bloody held it." The Night King's head tilted again. For the first time, something crept into his eyes that was not perfect cold. Calculation. He weighed his options like a man might look at a board and consider a new piece in play. The wall was hurt but not fallen. His ice had met something it could not simply overwhelm. His new dragon had been checked, its neck marred by fissures it did not know how to heal. And there was Skyrender, the dragon of two worlds, standing in the sky, exhausted but unbroken, breath still hot enough to turn his magic aside. The Night King lifted his hand. Below, the army of the dead halted mid-step. Wights froze where they stood, heads snapping up in eerie unison. Dead giants stilled. Bears stopped mid-prowl. The storm above them slowed. Snow that had been whipping in frantic circles began to drift more lazily, as if someone had loosened a tight grip. The static blizzard thinned around the ice dragon, giving those on the wall a clearer view of its cracked hide. Then, as smoothly as if a commander had blown a horn and given an order for ordered retreat, the dead began to turn. Not all. A fringe remained, bodies left behind as obstacles, as corpses that could be reanimated if needed. But the main bulk of the army pivoted away from Eastwatch and the wall, moving eastward along the coast. The ice dragon wheeled, following. "He's pulling back," Davos said, disbelief roughening his voice. "After all that, why?" "Because he learned," Jon said quietly, "what our fire can do, and what it can't." "He'll look for a weaker place," Daenerys said, eyes narrowed, watching the retreating storm. "He tried the wall head-on and found it resistant, so he'll go where stone and magic are thinnest." "East along the sea," Jon murmured. The map in his mind filled in, the coast beyond Eastwatch, the small fishing villages, the hidden inlets. "Or west along the wall, toward where men have grown lax." "Or both," Tyrion said grimly, appearing at his elbow. "He has the numbers to split." The ice dragon gave one last, echoing cry, then vanished into the thinning storm, heading along the coast. The Night King spared one final glance at the wall. He lifted his hand, palm outward, not in challenge, in promise. Then he turned away. The world felt oddly quiet after the retreat. The wind still blew, tugging at cloaks. The sea still groaned under its frozen skin. Men still shouted, coughed, tended to minor wounds, and thanked gods they weren't sure they believed in. But beneath it all ran a new, taut silence. They had met him in open battle now, fire against ice, and neither side had broken completely. Drogon landed heavily on the wall, claws digging deep grooves in the ice. He shook himself like a dog, sending water and frost flying. Daenerys slid down awkwardly, boots hitting the slick stone with a jolt. Her arms ached, her face burned with wind. Skyrender's landing was less graceful than usual. He hit the rampart with a grunt, wings folding more slowly. His sides heaved with each breath, white veins along his flanks dimmer now. Jon dismounted, legs wobbly. Ghost appeared as if from thin air, pressing against his thigh, nose bumping his hand. "You did it," Jon murmured to the direwolf, to the dragon, to no one. "We're still standing." Men crowded around in a loose circle, giving the dragons respectful distance. Tormund's eyes shone oddly bright. "You stopped the wall from falling," he said, "with that beast of yours." "Not alone," Jon said. "Her dragons killed whites as fast as he did." Tormund snorted. "Her dragons burned them. Yours erased them. I don't know what that means, but I know I like it." Davos limped up, face gray with exhaustion. "He pulled back because of Skyrender," he said. "He's not going to come at you straight again. Not if he can help it." Daenerys wiped rain and sweat from her face with the back of her hand. "He'll come for what we can't watch all at once," she said. "Every weak point, every forgotten gate, every quiet village." Jon stared north, where the storm had become a smudge on the horizon, moving along the coast. "The Night King surprised us today," he said. "With that dragon, with the way he used it." "He won't surprise us the same way twice," Daenerys said. "No," Jon agreed. "Next time he'll find a different way." He felt Skyrender's head lower until the dragon's muzzle brushed his shoulder. The heat there was weaker than before but steady. Jon rested his hand on the scaled snout. "You're not done," he whispered. "You haven't grown as big as you're meant to yet, and he hasn't finished showing us what he can do." He looked at Daenerys. "We'll need more than fire and walls," he said. "We'll need every old magic Bran can dig up from the roots, every secret the Maesters tried to forget, every blade that can break his generals. And we'll need your dragons and mine, stronger than they've ever been." Daenerys nodded slowly. "Then we grow them," she said, "and we learn, before he springs his next surprise." Above them, clouds parted briefly, letting a thin shaft of pale sunlight fall on the battered wall, and the dragons crouched upon it. For the first time since they'd seen the ice dragon, Jon let himself breathe all the way in. They had not won, not truly, but they had not lost. The night had teeth sharper than he'd known. The north had fire brighter than it had guessed. And somewhere between those two extremes, a bastard with a wolf and a dragon stood on a wall that was cracked but unfallen, staring into a horizon where surprises walked on blue feet. The dawn after the battle came thin and grudging, as if the light itself were wary of what the dark had birthed. Eastwatch's wall still stood, but it bore the memory of last night's wounds. A great patch of its northern face had turned rough and strange where Skyrender's fire had fused shattered ice, whorled and ridged, white lines twisting through blue like scars on a giant's skin. Below, the frozen bay lay pocked with impact craters where shards of frostfire had fallen and unmade whites, leaving only glassy potholes rimed with dust. On the rampart, life clung on. Men stamped their feet, breath steaming, faces drawn tight with exhaustion and disbelief. Some still stared north where the retreating storm had gone, waiting for it to return at any moment like a bad dream. Others just stared up. The dragons had not left with the darkness. Drogon crouched near the broken section of the wall, tail coiled, wings half-furled, eyes fixed on the horizon. Rhaegal and Viserion nestled together a little farther along, smaller bodies pressed close, heads resting on the ice. Frost rimed the edges of their scales where the ice dragon's breath had grazed them, but the warmth in their chests had beaten it back. And then there was Skyrender. He lay along the wall's crown like a living rampart, head near the central watchtower, tail tapering off toward the eastern end. His flanks rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths. Each exhale sent clouds of steam curling up into the gray sky. The white veins along his sides pulsed faintly under the black scales, like frost tracing a river's path beneath clear ice. Jon stood beside his head, a small dark figure against the dragon's bulk. He could have walked under Skyrender's jaw without ducking. 3 men could have stood shoulder to shoulder between the dragon's foreclaws. In the fitful light, every new glance showed him something larger, as if Skyrender had grown in the night to fill the size the battle had demanded of him. "He'll not fit on this bloody wall long," Tormund muttered, crunching up beside Jon, beard full of ice. "He wasn't meant to," Jon said. Tormund snorted. "You sure? Looks to me like the gods, or whatever you've annoyed, decided one wall wasn't enough." Samwell Tarly had never seen a dragon. Not truly, not until the White Raid on the Fist of the First Men, not in any way that counted. He had read about them. He had copied drawings of them in cramped margins. As a boy in Horn Hill, he traced tiny painted wings with a chubby finger and dreamed of far-off fires. Now he sat in what had once been Maester Aemon's cell, papers spread before him, and felt the weight of dragons in his bones. The parchments were older than he was by many times. Some bore the careful hand of Citadel scribes, neat lines of text in faded black ink and precise illustrations. Dragons arching over burning fields, dragons coiled atop mountains, dragons curled protectively around kings. Balerion in particular dominated the drawings. In one, the Black Dread loomed over a row of men and horses, wings spread, a mountain of muscle and scale. The proportions were wrong. Sam knew that the artist had clearly never seen him, but the sense of immensity came through. In another, the dragon's skull filled a hall, torchlight glinting off empty sockets big enough to swallow a soldier whole. In a margin in a newer script, someone had written wingspan estimated at 200 to 230 feet. Sam's own rough sketch lay beside the old page, a hasty profile of Skyrender based on Jon's halting descriptions, Gilly's questions, and the few wildlings who'd seen him pass over the haunted forest and were drunk enough to talk. "Bigger than the queens, that's for sure," one had said. "Big enough their shadows looked like his hatchlings." Another claimed Skyrender's pass had knocked snow from every tree above them, a blizzard of white and steam. Sam chewed the inside of his cheek. If the reports were even half true, Skyrender was already near Balerion's recorded size, and he was still growing. He dipped his quill, hesitated, then wrote in the margin under Balerion's neat, dry measurements. Comparative accounts suggest hybrid northern dragon has already reached or exceeded these dimensions at a fraction of Balerion's age. Continued growth likely. Source: Jon Snow, Lord Commander, former. Multiple eyewitnesses. Gods help us. The shutters rattled as wind shook them. A flurry of snow slipped through a crack, melting on the warmed stones near his feet. Sam wiped his palm on his sleeve and reached for another scroll. The old bear had once told him that knowledge was a sword that grew sharper with use. Right now, it felt more like a weight. What did the world do with a dragon that humbled the Black Dread? What did men, with their small banners and smaller grudges, become in the shadow of that? He did not know, but he knew who needed to. He began a letter to Old Town. In Old Town, the Citadel pretended the world obeyed ink. Within its many rings of stone and glass, men who had never seen the far north argued over the shape of threats sketched in other men's hands. They weighed words like weapons and used chains of metal where other orders used steel. Archmaester Marwyn did not fit. His chain was thick and odd, heavier than the others, with more Valyrian steel than most maesters liked to see. His hands were scarred, stained with peculiar alchemical burns. His eyes, deep set under shaggy brows, were the eyes of a man who had not forgotten the feel of the world outside the library. He tapped one thick finger on Sam's letter. "The Night King has woken something new in the north," he read aloud. "A dragon of ice, fire that unmade the dead. A hybrid creature of winter and flame, and one that grows still, already rivaling Balerion in size." Around him, the archmaesters murmured. Some scoffed, some frowned. "The Night King," one said. "Children's nonsense, written by a boy who spent too much time listening to crones." "The same boy who killed a other and lived to write of it," Marwyn replied. and who sent us obsidian when most of you would have dismissed dragonglass as jewelry." He set the letter down on the table beside an old, much-handled tome whose cover bore a dragon picked out in faint red. Its pages lay open to an account of Aegon's conquest, and the sketches there of Balerion rising over Harrenhal's melting towers looked almost childish beside Sam's cramped, desperate script. "The Black Dread," another Archmaester said, adjusting his silver and iron chain, "largest of the Valyrian dragons to survive the doom." His skull proved it. Marwyn's lip curled. "We took measurements of a skull," he said, "and decided nothing living could equal it again, because it suited us to believe such power had gone from the world. We forgot that the world does not pen itself to our comfort. Even if the Skyrender is as big as the boy says," a third objected. "He is but one dragon. The queen across the sea has 3 of her own. This hybrid is a curiosity, nothing more. The real threat remains the Targaryen with her armies and her dragons and her claim." Marwyn shook his head. "The real threat," he said, "is the death that does not obey death. The real threat is the cold that breaks stone. And the real question is whether this creature, this dragon of frost and fire, will stand with us or against us when that cold comes south." He traced the line where Sam had written Dwarf's Balerion. "You can pretend the Age of Wonders is done," he said, "or you can accept that it's returned, whether you like it or not." He rolled the scroll up and slipped it into his sleeve. "I'll go north," he said. Several Archmaesters barked laughter. "You? At your age? Better an old man who believes in dragons," Marwyn said, "than a young one who does not." He turned and stumped out, leaving the others to their dust and denial. Bran had never flown so far or with something so large. The weirwood's bark was slick with cold under his fingers. Sapdark tears dried in old tracks. Snow piled around the roots, muffling sound. In the dark, the faces of the carved kings in the crypts below seemed to bleed up through his mind, their stone eyes watching. He closed his own and the world slipped. He found Skyrender in a dream of air and heat. The dragon was coiled along a mountainside north of Eastwatch, where granite thrust through snow in jagged spears. His body wrapped around a crag that had once been a giant's marker, dwarfing it now. Wind tugged at his wings, ruffling the leathery membranes, but he slept through it, chest rising and falling in slow, heavy breaths. Bran drifted closer. Ghost's awareness came with him, a familiar thread of scent and instinct. He felt the dragon's warmth even in his mind, a furnace in a world of cold. He reached out. The first time he had brushed Skyrender's thoughts, they had been raw heat and hunger and a flickering confusion of images. Now they were layered. Memory had begun to accumulate in the dragon's mind, not like the straight lines men used to recall the past, but in spirals of scent and sensation. Fire and snow, the taste of white ash on the tongue, the feel of Jon's hand on his muzzle, the thrill of breaking through cloud into sunlight, the deep, satisfying ache of fighting something that fought back. Bran's ghost hand pressed to imagined scale. He felt a shock, as if roots and dragonskin had joined. The weirwood's awareness, slow and vast and deep, met Skyrender's in him. For a moment, Bran was neither boy nor raven nor wolf nor anything he knew. He was a conduit. Old power, sap and stone, reached into new, fire and frost and wingbeat. The white veins in Skyrender's scales flared. In the physical world, far to the east, the dragon's body tensed. Steam rolled off him in a sudden rush, ribs expanding, muscles tightening as if some invisible hand had clenched around his heart and squeezed. In Bran's mind, he saw something that was not memory and not prophecy but both. A black dragon over Harrenhal, Balerion's wings casting the towers into sudden night. Men running, melting, stones sagging like tallow. Aegon on his back, Valyrian steel in his hand, eyes fixed on a future he meant to make. The vision slid. Now Skyrender flew over a different castle. Winterfell, its towers whole and unburned, banners snapping in a hard wind. Below, white and gray cloaks mingled with brown and black and the bright colors of new allies. Above, in the dragon's shadow, Balerion's memory shrank, swallowed by something larger. Not just in size, in weight, in the way the world bent around him. "You're not meant to be a weapon only," Bran thought, though he didn't know if the dragon could hear words. "You're meant to be a shield, and shields must be broad." The roots glowed behind his eyes. He felt something respond in Skyrender, like a coiled muscle finally given leave to unfurl. "Grow," Bran thought, not commanding but allowing. Then he pulled away, heart hammering. He blinked awake in the god's wood, breath steaming, fingers cold. The weirwood's carved face stared down at him, lines in its bark subtly shifted. "I hope I haven't killed us all," he whispered. A wind stirred the red leaves, scattering a few around his wheels. Sounded like a chuckle or a warning. When Skyrender returned to Winterfell, the sky shrank to fit him. It had been months since the clash above Eastwatch, months of patrols over the haunted forest and hunts among the mountain crags, of feeding and fighting and sleeping coiled around rocks that groaned under his weight. Jon had watched it happen in increments. A ridge that once came to Skyrender's shoulder now barely reached his belly. Trees that had brushed his wingtips when he flew low now snapped beneath him like twigs. The dragons in Daenerys' stories, Balerion, Meraxes, Vhagar, were names and images on parchment. Skyrender was weight and heat and shadow 10 times larger than any hall. Word spread south on faster wings than his. By the time he crossed the last rise before Winterfell, the castle's people were already in the yard. They had watched dragons land here before. Drogon's arrival had made them scatter in fear and awe. Rhaegal and Viserion visits had drawn cautious curiosity. The courtyard stones were still cracked where Drogon's claws had dug in the first time Jon brought Daenerys north. Skyrender made Drogon look small. He came in low, body angled, wings beating slow and heavy. Each stroke pushed a wave of wind ahead of him that bent the bare-branched trees along the outer walls and sent snow streaming from rooftops. The sound of his approach was like distant thunder once, twice, 3 times over. "Gods!" Someone breathed beside Sansa on the rampart. He's bigger than the gods would." "Not quite," Sansa said. Her voice came out steady only because she forced it to. "But larger than any beast I've ever seen." Jon, watching from the courtyard, felt his throat tighten. He had flown with Skyrender in the months since, felt the slow, incremental increase in power with each beat of wings. He had known the dragon was growing, but distance softened scale. Here, with Winterfell's towers as reference, there was no softening. Skyrender's wings cast the entire yard into shadow as he passed. His body stretched from the broken tower Bran had once fallen from across nearly to the stables when he descended, claws reaching. He landed with a sound like the world exhaling. The ground shook, stones cracked, snow exploded in rings around his feet. Men staggered, some falling to hands and knees. Horses screamed and reared, eyes rolling white until handlers soothed or fled with them. Skyrender folded his wings carefully, each membrane shivering as he tucked them. Even so, the tips of his wings brushed the outer walls when they settled. He lowered his head, neck sinuous, until his muzzle was level with the top of the main gate. Ghost bounded into the yard, tail streaming, tongue lolling. He darted under Skyrender's belly without hesitation, a white streak beneath a mountain. Jon stepped forward, boots crunching on shattered ice and stone. For a moment, all of Winterfell held its breath. Then he laid his hand on Skyrender's muzzle. "Welcome home," he said. Tyrion had seen Balerion's skull. He had slipped past guards in the Red Keep as a boy, small enough to squeeze through cracks other children never noticed, and crept down into the cool, dark place where old king's trophies lay. He remembered the smell, dust and bones and faint traces of old oil. Most of all, he remembered the size. "The thing was so large," he said now, wine in hand, "that I could have ridden into its mouth on a horse with room to spare, in my memory at least. I grant you, childhood memory is a generous painter." Davos snorted. "And now, Tyrion gestured toward the hall's heavy doors, where faint vibrations ran through the wood with each shift of Skyrender's weight outside. Now I suspect if we ever bring his skull to sit beside Balerion's, the Black Dread will look like a pup's jawbone in comparison. Murmurs rippled through the gathered northern lords. Lord Manderley's many chins quivered. Balerion melted Harenhal, he said. Turned towers to slag. The maesters wrote that no larger dragon ever was. The maesters write many things, Tyrion said. Some of them even stay true. Drogon's head pushed through a high window then, drawn by the heat and the voices. His snout filled the opening, eyes gleaming in the firelight. A few men flinched. Others had grown used to the casual intrusions of dragons. He sniffed once, hot breath stirring banners. Your big one is jealous, Davos murmured to Daenerys. She sat at the high table with Jon and Sansa, hands wrapped around a cup of mulled wine. He's curious, she said. He's never met anything larger than himself that wasn't a hill. Tyrion watched her watching Drogon, then Jon, whose eyes kept flicking toward the doors where Skyrender lay. You're thinking about what happens when we can't keep them both fed, he said softly. Or satisfied. I'm thinking, Jon said, about what happens when the South sees him. He pictured King's Landing's crowded streets, its narrow alleys and high walls. He pictured Skyrender trying to land anywhere near that. The dragon would topple half the city by accident. There's no need to bring him to King's Landing, Daenerys said. Not if we can end this in the north. Tyrion raised his brows. You truly think Cersei Lannister will sit meekly while you fix the world for her, then step aside when asked? I think she won't matter, Jon said. If the walkers get past us, if Skyrender and your three fail, there won't be a throne left to squabble over. Only ruins. Sansa's gaze was cool. And if we succeed? He didn't answer at once. If we survive, he said carefully, we'll have to decide whether the world can bear a dragon larger than any who's ever lived, or whether such a thing should exist at all, Tyrion murmured. Bran dreamed of dragons more often now. Sometimes he flew on their backs. Sometimes he watched them from the weirwood's endless vantage, feeling their shadows pass over groves that had never known such shapes. The past was a sea he skimmed across, dipping now and then into deeper water. Tonight, the currents dragged him far. Valyria burned beneath him, or what had been Valyria. Volcanic peaks belched ash and fire into a sky streaked red and black. Rivers of lava wound between stone towers that had once been the marvel of the world, now half-melted and crumbling. Balerion flew over it all. He was vast, truly, wings beating slow and powerful. His scales shone black as obsidian, his eyes molten, his breath pure, overwhelming flame. Aegon sat secure between his neck spines, Valyrian steel bright at his hip, cloak snapping. From this height, he looked small as a beetle. The dragon turned his head, scanning the ruin below with an animal's indifference. When he roared, the air trembled. Bran felt the size of him, the weight. The stories had not lied. This was a beast who could blot out sun and swallow men whole. He let the vision tilt. He let roots and fire and Skyrender's memory seep into the old image, overlaying it, changing it. Now the same broken Valyrian landscape lay below. Ash plains, crumbling volcanoes, the skeletons of old dragons half buried in black sand. But Balerion's shadow was gone. Skyrender filled the sky. His wings stretched wider than the old dragons had, reaching from one smoldering peak to another. His body was thicker, his neck longer, his horns more jagged. The white veins that ran along his sides glowed faintly, lending him an otherworldly aspect. When he roared, the sound rolled over the ruin like a storm. Below, the bleached bones of ancient Valyrian dragons looked small. Some of their skulls were large enough to house a wagon, yes, but Skyrender's head alone could have crushed them. Bran felt no triumph in it, only weight. He understood suddenly why men in Old Town trembled at the idea of dragons at all, why the first men had bargained with whatever they bargained with to make the others. Fire this big could scour whole kingdoms, turn maps blank. He pulled back, the vision receding. When he opened his eyes in Winterfell's Godswood, his breath came in thin, white puffs. He's bigger, he whispered. Bigger than their worst stories. No one answered but the tree. There was something almost comical about trying to measure a dragon. Skyrender lay in the snow outside Winterfell's western wall, body stretched to what he evidently considered a reasonable degree. He did not seem particularly interested in the process. His head rested on his forepaws, eyes half-lidded, nostrils flaring lazily in the cold. Ghost had claimed one of those paws as a pillow, white fur a stark contrast to black scale. The direwolf's sides rose and fell with slow, contented breaths. Archmaester Marwyn did not look content. "You are certain he is not growing as we speak?" he demanded, squinting along the length of a knotted rope. Jon lifted a brow. "If he is, it's no faster than any other hour." "Why?" "Because every time I write a number down," Marwyn said, "I get the sense that by the time the ink dries it will already be wrong." Around them, a handful of Northmen and a couple of skeptical maesters from Winterfell juggled ropes and staves, moving along Skyrender's side in segments. They called measurements back, passing them up the line to a skinny scribe whose wax tablet was filling with cramped figures. From snout to the base of the tail, one of the men called breath steaming. "We've got 9 lengths of the 30-foot rope and some, Marwyn demanded. 3 paces, the man clarified. 9 times 30, plus, the scribe scratched furiously. 273 feet, Archmaester. Marwyn grunted. And tail? Another 150 at least, someone further down shouted. He won't uncurl the last bit. Skyrender flicked that bit of tail idly, sending a spray of snow over their heads like a lazy insult. Wing, Marwyn snapped. They stretched a rope from the dragon's torso to the tip of his folded wing, then multiplied, arguing briefly about angle and curvature until Marwyn nearly threw his inkpot at them. Finally, they settled on a span. Tyrion, watching from a small folding stool with a cup of wine that had already frozen at the edges, murmured, 250, give or take, if we're being cautious. Which we are, Marwyn growled. Because the maester who recorded Balerion's span did not have the benefit of standing under him with ropes. He had a skull and his imagination. He turned to Jon. Your dragon, he said, is longer than Balerion's measured accounts by at least 50 feet and broader through the chest. His wingspan could cast Harrenhal into night twice over. Jon absorbed this in silence. He had known Skyrender was larger. He had seen it with his own eyes, felt it in the way the dragon moved. But numbers made it something else. Something that could be written to Old Town and across seas. Something that would spread. Congratulations, Tyrion said dryly. You now officially own the largest living thing in the known world. Jon looked at Skyrender's immense, resting bulk, at Ghost's content sprawl, at Marwyn's ink-stained, anxious face. It doesn't feel like owning, he said. Far to the south, where winter was still mostly a word and a chill wind rather than a knife, kings and queens heard whispers of the dragon who dwarfed Balerion. Cersei Lannister sat in the map room of the Red Keep, the floor beneath her painted with rivers and mountains and little crowns. Her golden hair had grown thinner in recent years. The lines at the corners of her mouth had grown deeper. The wine in her cup was rich and dark. Qyburn held the letter at arm's length, as if the ink might bite him. Wings that span from one tower to another at Winterfell, he read, lips pursed. An Archmaester of the Citadel has measured him and declared him larger than any dragon recorded, including Balerion. He is said to answer to Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen both. Cersei's fingers tightened on the carved arm of her chair. Larger than Balerion, she repeated. They used that name as if it were some common yardstick. As if dragons were not tools meant to serve kings but storms to be admired. Qyburn smiled faintly. Storms can be turned, Your Grace, with the right instruments. The way you turned wildfire once, she said coldly, and blew half my city, and my enemies with it. He bowed his head slightly, accepting the barb. A dragon that size, he said, is more than a weapon. It is a symbol. As long as he lives, The North and the Silver Queen will have a shadow to throw over any bargain we make." Her jaw clenched. She had grown up under skulls, told tales of Aegon and Balerion as horrors and wonders both, only to see dragons return to the world in someone else's name. She had watched one burn her fleet and her men. Now another larger still had hatched under stark snow. "They think I will cower," she said, "that I will sit here and wait while they decide how to use that thing." Qyburn's eyes gleamed. "We can make preparations," he said. "Old ways, new devices. The Citadel may cling to its scrolls, but there are other avenues of knowledge." She looked down at the map. The North was a smear of pale paint at her feet, but it weighed more now than all the bright colors in the South. "Let them fight their ice and their dead," she said. "Let them spend that monster strength on the walkers. When they are both tired, dragon and corpse, then we will see what remains." She sipped her wine, fingers steady. "And in the meantime," she added, "have your men work on larger scorpions." Skyrender's size changed more than numbers and Maester's mutters. It changed how men marched. Lines of soldiers who might once have trudged across endless miles of snow under gray skies now walked beneath a living ceiling of wing. When Skyrender passed overhead, his shadow swallowed their banners whole, turned the whole column briefly into a moving blot on the white. Some men flinched every time, shoulders hunching, hands tightening on spears. Others straightened, chests swelling, eyes bright with something dangerously close to faith. "He's like a god up there," one of the younger boys whispered, craning to see the dragon as it glided low, the beat of its wings stirring the fur on his cap. "He's a beast," an older man said, "and beasts die. Remember that." Daenerys felt the weight of their gaze even from Skyrender's back. She sat behind Jon, one hand wrapped around the base of a neck spine, the other resting lightly on Jon's belt. Drogon flew higher today, giving Skyrender space to move, his own pride bent enough to account for the bigger dragon's shadow. "You see the way they look?" she shouted over the wind. Jon glanced down, then nodded once. "They look like they did at you in Meereen," he said. "When you burned the Masters." She grimaced. "That was adoration and terror. This is adoration and terror and—" He searched for the word. "Relief." She looked again. "Relief, yes. In the way men's shoulders loosened when Skyrender's shadow passed. In the way some unfroze their hands from their hilts, as if reminded that there was something on their side that might stand against the impossible. "Do you trust it?" she asked. "Skyrender." Jon considered. "I trust that he doesn't understand crowns or maps. I trust that he knows white from living. And I trust that so long as I stand in front of him, he won't burn what I tell him not to. Most of the time." She huffed. "That's more than I can sometimes say for Drogon." He glanced back at her. "And you?" he asked. "Do you trust a dragon bigger than any your ancestors rode?" She looked up toward Drogon's silhouette, smaller now against Skyrender's bulk. "I trust what we've made of them," she said. "But I also know that if we fall, they may remember they are older than our names, that they were here before men put crowns on their heads." Jon looked ahead, where the wall's distant line cut a pale scar across the horizon. "Then," he said, "we'd better not fall." The Night King did not measure in ropes. He measured in reactions. From a jagged outcrop of ice far to the north, he watched Skyrender's distant shadow cross the southern sky. It was little more than a smudge from here, long, dark, crawling along cloud and horizon. But he felt the weight of it in the pull of the world's magic as surely as he felt his own dragon's presence. The ice dragon crouched behind him, still carrying the scars of that clash over Eastwatch. Cracks cobwebbed its neck, filled now with a thicker, more opaque ice that pulsed with deeper blue. The breath that gathered in its chest responded more sluggishly than before, but it gathered all the same. The Night King laid a hand on its hide. Cold met cold. He sensed the limits there now. Not weaknesses, he did not think of things that way, but borders. He understood that this dragon of ice could break stone and breath, but that its own substance could be stressed by the hybrid fire from the south. So he changed his plans. He stepped off the cliff. He did not fall. The ice rose under his feet, forming steps where none had been, carrying him down to the frozen plain. Around him, the ground stirred. Ice grew, not in the simple shapes of walls and circles he had used before, but in stranger forms. Spiraled spires that caught the weak light and bent it, arches that looked almost like ribs, platforms that rose and fell like breaths. Within, some figures lay dormant, shapes vaguely dragon-like, experiments in scale and structure incomplete. He did not have the luxury of ages he'd had once, when he and his makers had sculpted endless variants on winter's theme. The fire that walked in the south demanded swifter work. Still, he was not without patience. He watched his ice rise. He felt that great hybrid presence far to the south, growing, stretching the world around it. If the Fire Child had reached the size of the greatest of Valeria's beasts, then winter would simply have to grow sharper teeth. He turned back to his dragon. Its blue eyes glowed, reflecting Skyrender's unseen shadow like a promise.